Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women of Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Calder Hulme. And today we're going to do something that we haven't done for a little while now, and that is a PostPod. And this is where we look at the last podcast that got published and digest it a little bit, talk about it, contextualize some things. We had such a fantastic time talking together, Natalie and I, and there just really wasn't time to dig into some of the more complex ideas and some of the sources that we were drawing on, or I was drawing on really in my questioning. So I wanted to share some of those today because these authors and these people that we're drawing from, especially in looking at Latina ambition, are really incredible Chicana feminists that I've really enjoyed learning and studying with. So I'm going to share some of those citations today and discuss a little bit more about some of the vocabulary and some of the themes that are used there, because I think it's useful and really helpful to hear the voices of the people that are coming up with these theories and these ideas to describe the experience of so many people. So here's a little synopsis of 4 different texts that have been really helpful for me. Okay, so the first text that I want to look at is called Methodology of the Oppressed, and that's by Chela Sandoval. And this is a really interesting mapping that Sandoval does of U.S. feminists of color. And she shows this differential mode of consciousness that she shows is located in these women of color, and that their unique positions and perspectives and abilities and experiences as women of color in the United States gives them this really unique angle and existence in these in-between spaces. And she says that these perspectives are so essential, and she shows it. She proves it in this essay. It's really fantastic. But we need these perspectives of women of color because they live in these liminal spaces, and they, out of necessity and out of creativity and out of survival, end up, what this is a quote, weaving between and among oppositional ideologies. And I love that concept and that visual of weaving in between spaces and things to kind of create a new tapestry of color and meaning and blending things together that other people who don't have that perspective wouldn't be able to do and create. And it's a very heavy text, it's very technical, but it's really, it felt really inspiring to me because it's showing how feminism can be done with an intersectional lens, and how it can be a place of creation and insight and hope in a way that white feminisms in the United States really can't do. It really does take all of us to have equality and have everybody's needs met. We have to have all the different perspectives. And these feminist women of color have this really unique perspective as being some of the most disenfranchised populations in the United States, where their ideas and their perspectives are really going to make it better for everybody. The next text that I want to look at is called Monstrosity in Everyday Life, Nepantleras, Theories in Flesh, and Transformational Politics. And that's written by Robert Gutierrez Perez. And this is another one of these really cool concepts. Nepantleras, and remember my accent is awful. I haven't spoken Spanish out loud in a decade. They are the people that dwell in that in-between space. And Robert goes into detail about how they mediate the borderlands. And the borderlands is kind of the topic of our last episode with Natalie. So Nepantleras mediate the borderlands, and that is in the physical spaces that they live in, and having borders of countries cross through spaces where people are living and people are forced to literally cross a border, but also that metaphorical border that we talked about that is navigating different spaces. And then Robert goes into detail about how nepantleras have to live with contradiction and how they choose to be bridge makers in a way that is subversive. It's a method for survival, but it's also a way that deconstructs a lot of the imposed limits of Western colonization, capitalism, all these things that try and put people in a box. And so nepantleras are people that hold intersectional identities, can cross these different spaces, and can be viewed as monsters for doing this, crossing spaces, but can take that identity to then make it something that is empowering and transformative, and a way that, again, is that like subversive method for existing in the world and making it better. Okay, the next text, we're going to go through these real quick because they're so great, and they are dense, but I really think it's important to share them. This is Borderlands / La Frontera, the New Mestiza, and it's by Gloria Anzandula, who is another fantastic Latina feminist author. Highly, highly recommend. And in this text, Anzandula talks about borderland dwellers and how they hone what we referenced in the podcast as a sixth sense. And she calls it la facultad. And that is that awareness of the social context that develops throughout the life of Latina women as a means of self-preservation. And in that process, she goes into kind of the darker side of that. We talked a lot about the positive side of that with Natalie, the humor, the creativity, the bonding, the community making that can be there. Anzandula talks, though, about what can be lost in that cultivation, because it is kind of a forced cultivation. I would almost say the way that the Anzandula talks about it, at least, is kind of like a trauma response, is how I would describe it. So Anzandula says that what is lost in the cultivation of la facultad is our innocence, our knowing ways, and our safe and easy ignorance. And so having to develop that sixth sense, that awareness, is what keeps, in Anzandula's eyes, Latinas safe and gives them that superpower that we talked about, but it also comes at a cost that can be really heavy. But as we heard in our last episode, it can be a place of hope and creation and of new thoughts. And that's where this idea of U.S. women of color feminisms being able to come in and show us things that maybe I wouldn't be able to see based on my social location and my level of privilege. And so it can be this really positive building thing, and it can also be this really, really heavy thing. And I think what Natalie was saying is that's where community comes in. That's really, really important, especially in the Latinx community. Having each other and having people that can kind of lean on each other with that. And that's where, in terms of like ambition, because this is a podcast on ambition, all of those different social locations and identities and like abilities can come together in really beautiful ways, but they can also be locations of disenfranchisement and struggle and imposed and contradictory expectations, and can then pose more obstacles in maybe presenting a way that is considered to be more masculine, or to be outside of the cultural norm, or to be transgressive, crossing those borderlands if you consider gender stereotypes and gender roles. And if you're crossing that one way or another, it's going to be rough. There's going to be resistance to that. And it can also be this place of incredible creation and growth. The last text I want to talk about, we didn't really go into it a lot, but we kind of referenced this population. And I'm still kind of chewing with this idea because there is a lot of disagreement about this term, and it's not necessarily a new term, but it's still being discussed. Next text I want to look at is Chicana Latina Testimonios, Mapping the Methodological and Pedagogical and Political. Mouthful. And that is by Dolores Delgado Bernal, Rebecca Bruciaga, Judith Flores Carmona. And this was published in 2017. And it's a response to another author, Spivak, who coined the term subaltern. And that subaltern is one who the dominant powers have rendered as a person who doesn't matter, isn't worth listening to, and is or not being understood, one who does not have a platform to speak from. And originally, Spivak said that the subaltern, these people that cannot be heard, or really, my interpretation is that they're saying things all the time, but the dominant society, the people with power, are not listening. So these people who are not being heard and understood are stuck until they are given a platform, and even that term given is problematic. Until they can make their voice heard, they are disenfranchised. But what Bernal et al., all those authors, that's what et al. Means, what all they responded with is that even when Chicana and Latina scholars are in the academia, are in the public eye, that because of their social location, that they are continually not understood and not listened to and not heard. Thus, they are still subaltern, even when they technically have a platform or they are published or whatever it is. And so it's another example of this like really complex identity of not being seen, not being heard, not being taken seriously. Maybe it is because people don't know what to do with you because you inhabit multiple locations. Or maybe just what you're saying comes from such a unique positionality, and it is looking in places that most people aren't seeing, that we don't want to hear. And so these are some of the different ideas I've been thinking with and looking at the really innovative ways that Chicana feminists, Latinas are showing up in the world and exhibiting ambition in ways that maybe the rest of us aren't ready for. And you know what? We need to get ready for it, and we need to be supporting everybody who wants to be doing awesome things, even if it's in ways that are surprising to us, even if they are weaving things together in ways that we don't expect, even if they're bringing a perspective to the surface that has been in the shadows for our own lived experience. And those borderland dwellers that can live with contradiction and can be the bridge makers are the people that make subaltern people legible and create themselves as legible people. And so when we are doing whatever work we're doing, whether it's in the government, whether it's in our homes and our communities, we need to be listening to all people and to be valuing their experiences, even if they're different than our own, even if they are bringing ideas to the table that like seem totally out of left field, to use a baseball analogy here, a very American sport. Maybe it's not out of left field. Maybe it's just based on our social position and our social context. So those are some people to go read with and to think with and to consider, especially if you want to widen your lens. I'm trying to widen my lens to understand ambition, to understand who am I not listening to, who am I not thinking with. So those are some great places to go. I highly recommend. So we're going to wrap this up as our post pods go. They're pretty short. So just thanks for listening. This is Women of Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Calder Hulme. And I will, again, put the transcription up here. I'm putting it in the show description. So you should be able to see that within your app while listening. If you would like, if that's for some reason hard to read or the text is just too large or whatever it is, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to email out those notes or add another layer to my website where maybe those transcripts are a little more legible and easy to find. But yeah, I strongly suggest each of those texts. There's so many incredible Latina authors out there, Latinx people who are writing and speaking and teaching and living in ways that we can all really learn from. So go check out the Latina ambition of weaving and liminal spaces and border crossings and speaking up when people don't want to hear or don't know how to hear. Really, some really incredible women out there. So hope you enjoyed this. And again, please let me know if those transcriptions are helpful, and we'll see you again next time. See ya.